Another edition of Eye on the Issues, and today we are talking with Richard Jones. He is the founder of the Wyoming Citizens Against Normalization. Richard, thanks for joining us. Tell me about your organization.
Our organization is called WYCAN, which is WYCAN, and it's Wyoming Citizens Against Normalization. It's an ad hoc group started up here in the Cody area, but we do have statewide interests and national interests in, and the name is very deliberately chosen. I personally feel, and our group feels, that the biggest problem we have with drug and substance abuse issues, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, is the normalization of drug use as being acceptable and inevitable and popular. That's the slippery slope, downhill slope, and it can be tied almost directly to many of the more critical problems we're having, which I can talk about at some point in the future, but with fentanyl and everything else. We believe that the low level of accepting drug use as normal in some fashion allows all these other things to take place. We're primarily concentrating on cannabis issues in this state because Wyoming is one of only a couple of states that so far has no legal representation of marijuana in the state. You can't distribute it, sell it, possess it, use it. And in effect, if we do nothing in Wyoming, it's the best thing we could ever do. But people keep saying, well, we've got to get on top of it and regulate it. And any regulations proposed would only open the door. So that's a battle we're fighting in this state.
Tell me, how long have you been involved in this battle?
Probably my whole life. I was a child of the 60s and 70s and went to school in Southern California, college, and all those years. So marijuana drug culture, of course, was getting popular during that era. It's not the same drug we have today, but I've had a career in law enforcement, federal, state, and county law enforcement for almost 30, 40 years, as an EMT for almost that same amount of time. For 7 years, I worked as a research assistant in neuropsychology, and as a psychometrist, we dealt primarily with traumatic brain injuries, but I know a lot about cognitive behavior and brain development. And my wife has been involved in substance abuse prevention for some 30 odd years. And it's just something inherent that I've known a lot, been passionate about it, and personally just experienced in my own family negative consequences of primarily just marijuana. And so, you know, this isn't going to affect me much in the rest of my life, whatever I've got left, and my kids are all doing pretty good. But to me, it's a public health concern and a safety concern. It shouldn't be political, but it is. And I feel that the media, not the media, but the industry, the at-large addiction for profit industries, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, have done a masterful job in the last 20 years in helping to normalize these products. And that's where I sit. So we provide information and factual-based materials because nobody else does. Nobody's ever made a dime going against marijuana.
Let me ask you, do you think lawmakers in the state of Wyoming, where do you think they sit on when it comes to this? Obviously, they haven't approved anything, which is a great thing at this point. But do you think they're well educated when it comes to what this can actually do to your communities?
No, and this is universally true across the whole United States. The propaganda and the normalization effects of the industry have been so prevalent. I'd say most people in the country, and throw lawmakers right into this system, are just purely ignorant. They just don't know. Most people are not drug users. Most people don't use these substances. However, the industry has followed, the marijuana industry has completely followed the big tobacco playbook. You make your sharp substance seem harmless, even beneficial. 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camels. Virginia Slims help you lose weight. Celebrity endorsements, tennis players, and popular people. Of course, and then you make it popular for kids. Joe Camel, candy cigarettes, and then the next step in that thing is getting more access to it. Vending machines, give free cigarettes to soldiers after the war. Coupons and promotions for it. And the tobacco industry got busted on that. They had a highly addictive, poisonous substance, and they lied about it for years and years. And half our population was addicted to cigarettes back in as early as the 60s. And consequently, that industry has been reined into a bit. We've gone from 50% to about 17% of smokers in the U.S. However, the marijuana industry has followed the exact same playbook. You make it seem harmless and even beneficial. Actually, it's medicine. Who can be against that? You increase access by legalization, first medical, then recreational. You market it to kids. You go into any head shop. You used to live in, were you in if you were in Colorado when they started going, but you go into any place that sells marijuana products, the packaging and the marketing is not geared towards adults. It's geared towards kids and children. And the access becomes, they say, well, we're going to make it illegal for kids under 21. Sure. When I was a kid, you couldn't smoke cigarettes until you were 16 or 18. You couldn't buy booze. Did I get cigarettes when I was 15 years old? Yeah, that's for my dad. Thanks. Or you stole your dad's cigarettes, or you got in the liquor cabinet. So laws don't stop people from doing stuff unless there's accountability. But the marijuana industry, to be short, has followed this propaganda playbook for up to 30 years now. And it's because of some policies, one or two, and specifically in the last few years, they've unleashed this drug on the country. 26, 27 states now have some form of legal marijuana.
Yeah.
So it's a huge lift.
Yeah. I think one big aspect of marijuana, the use of marijuana, the legalization of the marijuana, and then the impact of marijuana is the strength of the marijuana, because what's out there now compared to what was out there 40 years ago is a completely different ballgame. Can you explain that?
You're exactly right. Back in the 70s when I was in college, people were smoking some marijuana in California. It's illegal, but the potency of the drug, the THC psychoactive component of marijuana, was around 1 or 2%, more or less. And you could smoke a whole joint of marijuana and maybe share it with a friend and get a little high. But today's marijuana, in the last 15 years, and particularly in the last 10 years, this potency is now up on smokable marijuana anywhere from a minimum of about 17% up to about 30%. Okay, so one joint back in 1970 that might get you and your buddies a little tiny buzz for an evening, that same joint at a potency level of 30% can get a whole room full of people. And the whole room full of people aren't sharing that one joint. They each have their own. So the effects, the individual effects on people, it's like having a 3.2 beer and then taking a shot of scotch. It's just a different animal. And most people from your age to my age, particularly, these are policymakers and other people, are thinking of it as grandma's weed that she used to smoke back in the 70s. They have no concept of what's out there today. And a matter of fact, I would go to say that anyone in this country that has any, quote, knowledge of marijuana, and they know all about it, that's over 5 years old, doesn't know what they're talking about today. It's a completely different animal.
We've been talking, of course, about states legalizing marijuana, but of course, from a federal level, Chuck Schumer has said he's going to try to get that through on the Senate side. Fortunately, the Republicans at this point control the House, so that's probably not going to go anywhere at this point. But I think from a national level, I'm just not quite sure the American people really understand, as you mentioned before, the slippery slope, and that's really what this is. When you start moving in the direction of a legalization and making people think it's normal, that becomes the problem, and that's when they kind of lose track of reality, because it is a gateway drug. Can you explain kind of how marijuana plays out as a gateway drug?
That's always been the big argument for marijuana. It's not a serious drug. No, it's not a gateway drug. Nobody ever died from marijuana. If you smoke marijuana or something, you're not going to go directly into heroin or anything like that. all of that may be somewhat true. It's not exactly true. People have died, particularly high potency stuff, and going on to harder drugs is not a given at all. Probably 17-20% of people who are addicted to marijuana will go on to other substances. However, almost everyone in substance abuse programs, in jail, or anything else for use of other drugs also uses marijuana. Interesting. And when you ask them how they got started in their path to addiction, alcohol and marijuana, it's the bottom baseline thing. Alcohol is the most abused drug in the world. Marijuana is second, and by a huge exponential increase over the next nearest addictive drugs. When you're getting down to meth and opioids and things like that, they're huge worldwide. And even though marijuana is not legal in 190 out of 195 countries, believe it or not, everybody says the U.S. is just behind everybody else. No, we're not. So as a gateway drug, marijuana, what it does, because of its decreased perception of harm, its myth of medical benefits and the fact that, it's really not going to do anything, allows particularly youth to be introduced to the drug culture. After school, I've got a buddy, I'm in 6th grade, 7th grade. I've got a buddy who's got some marijuana, and he says, hey, go try this. And I try a little bit of it. And then I go to a party with him. And then somebody within that culture of the drug users has other drugs, meth, prescription meds, or who knows what, it doesn't matter. But it gets you introduced into the drug culture. So that's why I believe firmly that marijuana is an absolute gateway drug, socially, culturally, and psychologically, not necessarily physically. However, if you are addicted, a chronic user of marijuana, a daily user, or even less frequently that, particularly youth, has I forget what it is, 5 or 10 times percentage higher chance of going on to using other drugs. So it is physically a gateway drug too, but the psychological, sociological effects of it to me are what's really a problem. As a matter of fact, I'll just touch on this yeah, okay. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, diving down that road, let's talk about what the damage it does to people.
Well, I was just going to say specifically as this gateway problem. Right now, today, 5 years ago, it was all the opioid crisis and all this kind of stuff. And that was primarily prescription meds, and the pharmaceutical industry had sold this thing falsely, and doctors were all in it. And they kind of got busted, and it's kind of under control now. They've got a lot of things in place where the Oxycontin and that kind of stuff is better, that part of the crisis. But because of that, people have now turned to the opioid substitutes like fentanyl, okay? And here's where marijuana comes into play on that. What I hear from, and it's all, even though, an overdose of fentanyl is pretty devastating. It's basically an anesthetic, just stops you from breathing. But what I hear that really upsets me is a parent who's just lost their 17-year-old kid to a fentanyl overdose. And what I hear them say time after time on television or wherever is that all my son was doing was using some party drugs. All my daughter did was buy some pills online. She thought she was getting, MDA, or she was getting something online. And what I hear from that term is that as a parent, you were somehow okay with your child just using party drugs. If your child had not been using those party drugs, they wouldn't have gotten something laced with deadly fentanyl. They say most of these accidental overdoses, or overdoses of fentanyl, most of them are accidental. People who are using fentanyl and know they're doing fentanyl, they're like heroin addicts and other stuff. They know what they're doing. They don't usually die from it. It's the unexpected people that don't know they're getting it. And probably half of these deaths, in my opinion, are accidental. The person didn't know what they were doing. So when you talk about fatal harm of marijuana, I'll trace it right to the fentanyl problem, particularly for youth. I mean, what did you know when you're 16? I knew everything when I was 16. I got progressively stupider after that, but and with the propaganda and the perceptions of harm, it used to be, kids today who are probably 12 to 30 because of the tobacco industry and all the regulations put on them, getting rid of advertising and a lot of other stuff, putting warnings on cigarettes. Most people today, and particularly youth, will tell you that tobacco and nicotine products are probably harmful. They say, I wouldn't, use is increasing a little bit in that category, but basically they're saying, no, I'm not doing that. What about marijuana? Oh, it's okay. It's really not a problem. So the perception of harm has been changed, and it's not true, but emotions and perceptions are much more powerful than facts and statistics. And we argue facts and statistics all the time. It goes in one ear and out the other. This is the problem with legislators. And to go on with legislators, which was one of your original questions, in almost every case, I believe, except the state of Illinois, marijuana legalization, starting with medical, progressing later on to recreational in these states, was all by initiative referendum, ballot initiatives. The industry could not get these things passed through legislators because they had to debate the issue. And the facts were obvious, so it either left people hesitant or saying, no, we're not going to do this. But initiative referendum is easy. It's easy to get it on a ballot. You have a simple thing. You say, are you in favor of legalizing marijuana? Yes or no? And say yes. And if the voters vote for it, and which is usually a minority of people vote anyway, if a minority of voters vote for it, it now becomes the law. Now the legislature and the executive office has to deal with it. They have to make the regulations to do everything. But they didn't start it. And almost all the states except Illinois got it on a voter initiative. And then the industry concentrated on those states to get it to be recreational. Mm-hmm. And there are only about 27 or 28 states have initiative referendum, and almost all of them now have medical marijuana or recreational. Those states that don't have initiative referendum basically are still holding the line. Now, Wyoming does have it. In 97, they authorized ballot initiative, and we've had several attempts over the last number of years, and they've failed to get it on the ballot. I'm scared that if they do, that would open door. That's what happened in Montana. They got it on the ballot in Montana. They voted in. Most people in Montana didn't want it. The legislators drove their butts for a couple of years trying, regulating and this and that. Finally, marijuana advocates took them to court and said, look, we authorize this. It's state law. It's legal. You guys have to set up the procedures so we can sell it. So it took a couple of years before it got traction in Montana, but they were forced to do it because it was the law. So this industry is smart. They're manipulative, and so far they're being very successful. Now, on the federal level, you have some stopgaps in there. You do have the FDA, you do have the Surgeon General, you do have the CDC and other people that will back up onto factual, scientific-based information. But again, the government's a political body, so. I mean, the former Speaker of the House, John Bonner, is now a marijuana lobbyist. So, what can I say?
Yeah, that says a lot right there. All right, we could talk about this all day, obviously, Richard. But let's just focus in on this one last aspect of it, and then we'll continue our discussion in another session. Let's talk about what people in Wyoming need to know about what regular marijuana use for anybody, younger, older, doesn't matter, what that does to people.
Well, the statistics are pretty raw, but the single biggest effects on marijuana use, and as previous guests have told you, are devastating to youth and the growing mind. From 10 years old up to about 20 or so, the brain is plastic and it's forming things. And this drug is completely a brain-oriented drug for the most part. This is one of the stark differences between marijuana and alcohol. People say, well, it's just like alcohol or this or that. It is not. Alcohol is very physiological. It affects the whole body in various ways. It's very predictable. It leaves the system rapidly through the liver. It causes some numbness and motor control problems in the brain, which is why we get the effects from alcohol. But marijuana goes directly to receptors in the brain, and it affects every aspect of your body. In term use, it's not like alcohol where it leaves your system. It stays in the body for traces of for up to a month or more, just from one-time use. But the cumulative effects after the high wears off after a couple of hours will last definitely for the next couple of days. Lack of focus, lack of motor control, poor judgment, and in turn, these effects will also impact overall the other bodily functions. So the brain in the youth, been studies that have shown that the younger you start, the more likely you are to be addicted. The younger you start, you're more likely to have lifelong problems. Less high school graduates, less college graduates, less income over life, and higher suicidal rates, more chances of having psychotic breaks and other severe mental problems. And it used to be a lot of these were kind of supposed, but now there's clinical evidence where they've gone from correlation to causation. They know for a fact now, particularly the higher potency drugs, that high potency THC will cause psychotic breaks, will induce schizophrenia. Now, it varies from person to person to a degree. Some of this you have to be susceptible, and one of the biggest effects I have on people in general that people don't talk about is that as we age, like me, you get aches and pains, you have problems, you have things going on, and somebody says, well, try a little marijuana and it'll cure your whatever, and you feel better because of it. Well, you probably will get some euphoric effects and maybe some of that pain or arthritis or whatever it is, body might feel a little better and stuff like that. But then you still got the problem 2 years later, 3 years later, and you finally go to the doctor and say, hey, I've got this thing going on here. And the doctor says, oh, how long you had that? Oh, about 3 years or so. Oh, what have you been using to treat it? Well, actually, I've been using, marijuana or something else. And the doctor says, gee, that's really too bad. If you'd seen me a couple of years ago, we could have got this before it went to stage 4.
Wow.
People are going legitimate medical treatment to take a product that is not proven to be of any benefit. And that to me is just fraud. It's a fraud on people and public's health and their trust. And that kind of ticks me off. I just don't like scam artists and snake oil salesmen.
Yep. I don't blame you one bit. So Richard, let's tell people real quickly, if they want to find out more about your organization, Wyoming Citizens Against Normalization, where do they go?
They can write us a direct email to WYCAN, WYCAN 2022 @gmail. I can put them on a mailing list. We do not have a web page. We do have a phone, but the direct email contact, YCAN 2020 @gmail. And we provide as much information as possible that is sourced. It's not my opinion. We try to back up anything we have. We'll change things as facts dictate. Things are discovered, and we will try to support any group. We feel knowledge is power. If most people have an idea of what something is, they can make up their own minds. But the propaganda of the industry is so prevalent. No one has ever made a dime going against marijuana. It's all on one side. So it takes money and time and access programs like yours to get information out to people who will admit they really don't know what's going on. So in Wyoming, we're trying to hold the line, and this normalization process is more insidious than people realize. So that's our goal. And
with understandable for sure. And Richard, you and I'm sure you realize right now we could talk about this for the next 2 hours.
Yeah,
but we're gonna continue this during another conversation. So if anybody wants to find out more about the Wyoming Liberty Group, then go to ywliberty.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Richard, thank you so much for your time. We'll talk soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much, Michael.